Welcome attendees. Welcome Adam, Ahmed, Fatima, Lilia, Mohammed. Please indicate where you're calling in from in the chat function. Welcome to the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators ADR World Tour, Arbitration and Mediation as a Global Force for Good. We are in week 8 in the Middle East. Good afternoon to all. Good evening to some. Hi, Omar from Lebanon. Awesome. Welcome. Please feel free to use the chat function to let us know where you're calling in from. Welcome to the ADR World Tour. We'll begin in just a few moments. Welcome, Hussam. I see that your hand is raised. I'm not sure if that's intentional. Welcome, Gabrielle from France. Istanbul's in the house. Welcome. We'll be in Turkey tomorrow as well. Hope to have you. We'll be starting in just one more minute. Thank you to all for attending the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators ADR World Tour. Attendees are still rolling in. Ahmed, welcome from London. Adam Brannigan, you sound like a relative of mine. Fatma, welcome from Egypt. Cairo Center is here as well. Glad to have you. Well, let's get started. My name is Brian Brannon, and I serve on the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators North America Branch Board of Directors and its Young Members Group Steering Committee. On behalf of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators Young Members Group, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the CIArb ADR World Tour, Arbitration and Mediation as a Global Force for Good. The Chartered Institute of Arbitrators Young Members Group presents a series of webinars which highlight the unique importance and efficiencies ADR provides in allowing the world's economy to remain operative and functional, even during times of great economic uncertainty. Perhaps no greater time of economic uncertainty has ever existed than today. Beginning with Asia in week 1, the ADR World Tour has visited 11 different regions and 15 webinars. Today we're in week 8 in the Middle East. Each webinar is focused on ADR and access to justice, ADR as an efficient alternative to traditional litigation, and ADR as a means to strengthen the rule of law. The Chartered Institute of Arbitrators Young Members Group ADR World Tour is powered by a group of 18 volunteers who have spent their time and dedicated themselves to leading this initiative in each region throughout the world. Today, it's my pleasure to be joined by Sarah Colette Aranjo, who is based in Dubai and is a partner at Al Tamimi and Company. Sarah will be moderating today's panel and will introduce tomorrow's panel in Turkey. It's been a pleasure to work with all of our volunteer leadership, and at this time I will hand it over to Sarah. Thank you so much. Oh, and I want to indicate that we are recording for full disclosure. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Brian, and good afternoon to everyone from Dubai, or good morning, or even good evening, perhaps, depending on your location. I'm very much delighted to be here with you today. And I would like first to extend my thanks to the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators for the kind invitation to sort of chair the Middle East and Turkey series. I'm absolutely honored by this invitation, and would like to share with some of you before we get started is that when I was tasked with sort of putting the scientific content for the series, one thing immediately popped into my mind is notwithstanding the controversial relationship that the Middle East has had historically with arbitration, and I'm referring to the very early on decisions pertaining to arbitral proceedings back in the 50s of the last century, and particularly with respect to oil and gas disputes, and the first ever modern arbitration case, which has taken place in Abu Dhabi, which was the case versus the Sheikh of Abu Dhabi in the 1950s, and thereafter the Saudi Aramco cases or saga of cases that spanned over 30 years from the 60s onwards in KSA. Those decisions were not obviously very well perceived here in the region and have obviously hindered the proper prospects and development of an environmentally also friendly development of the arbitration framework in the region. Now, with the sophistication of economies in the region, we've seen very much recently a positive push towards a better and more environment arbitration framework here in the region. And what's quite telling is that when we look at the early 90s, there were around a handful number of arbitral institutions in the region, not more than 5, and more precisely 3 at the time. Whereas today in 2021, there are over 40 or even 50 arbitral institutions in the MENA region, which showcases obviously not only an exponential growth in the offering to users in the region, but as well as we will see today beyond the region as well, but also is a sign of the greater interest that the users based in the region, but also outside from the region, have showcased and their appetite to have their disputes resolved through arbitration. On this note, I'm extremely delighted today to be joined by colleagues from leading arbitral institutions, and I will present them by alphabetical order by first name. First, Dr. Dalia Hussein, who joins us from Cairo. Dr. Dalia is the Deputy Director of the Cairo Regional Center for Commercial Arbitration. Then by Christian Alberti, who's General Counsel and Chief of ADR at the Saudi Center for Commercial Arbitration, and who joins us today from Saudi. And then by as well Mark Dimitri, who is currently a Deputy Counsel at the ICC Secretariat team in Paris, and who is part of the team handling the extensive arbitration cases in the Middle East. And then Pavel Kalev, who's a case manager at the Dubai International Arbitration Center. And last but not least, Robert Stephen, who's the registrar at the DIFC LCIA Arbitration Center, who joins us from as well Dubai. So I'm extremely delighted by the sort of broad and diverse panel that we have today, which is gonna definitely set the floor for an enriching and insightful discussion. For further information on the speakers' full biographies, these can be accessible at the CIArb website at the YMG World Tour, whereby you can download the program and you will get an access to the full biography of our panelists today. Now, to start off, maybe after this introduction, as we've seen, there has been an exponential growth in the number of arbitral institutions in the region. And these have been more or less as well supported by a legislative and a regulatory framework. And so I'll start off by asking Dr. Dalia, to which extent has the presence or availability of a safe seat or a reputable seat contributed to the development of the Cairo Center?
Thank you very much, Sarah. I would like first to thank you and thank Brian and the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators for organizing this series of events, very important, I think. And I also would like to thank you for bringing up the old arbitration cases in the region. And as you mentioned, my question, like the question I have to answer, that I will answer, is the impact of the seat on the institution. But I would also like to point out that the institutions also, I think, have an impact on the seat. I think the development of credible, reliable arbitral institution certainly had an impact on the acceptance of arbitration in the region and also in the seat. But to come back to my question, I think that yes, the seat contributed to the Cairo Center's success and development, of course, in two ways. I think first in the legal status of the center on the one hand, and on the other hand, the legal framework within which the center is operating. So to start with the legal, the establishment of the center itself, probably most of you know, or some of you know, that the center is a non-profit international organization that was created in 1979 by exchange of letters between the ALCO, that is the Asian African Legal Consultative Committee. At the time, now it's an organization. And it is an international organization created following the Bandung Conference on for the non-aligned state. So this organization made exchange of letters and then a headquarter agreement with the Egyptian government related to the establishment of the Cairo Center and other regional centers in Asia and Africa. The purpose was to develop international arbitration to encourage users from these regions to recourse to arbitration and use these institutions. This legal status, if I may say, this international agreement provided that the center, yes, is an international organization that benefits from immunities, enjoyed immunities and privileges, as well as the employees at the center. This was very important because it helped the center to exercise its functions in a way that is neutral and independent from the parties and from the host state government. And it contributed to enhance, I think, the credibility of the center and to increase the confidence of the users in the center. This neutrality was recognized even by a report of the African Development Bank in 2014, where it stated that the center provided a full independent and neutral arbitration, and that it was not like the government or the government of the state does not affect or the center's administration of cases, even when cases where a public entity is involved. And I think this is a very important issue. The second point is the legal framework where the center operates. I think that the Egyptian courts are generally recognized as being very friendly to arbitration. Egypt adopted an ancestral-based arbitration law in 1994, dealing with both domestic and international arbitration. Egyptian courts are generally friendly to arbitration. It is now a jurisprudence constant that courts exercise a minimal control over arbitral awards, either during setting aside or enforcement proceedings. They repeat like formulas constantly that setting asides are not appeals, and they should be limited to the list of grounds provided for in the law. Public policy is also understood in very broad terms in what is equivalent to international public policy. Like the highest Egyptian courts now are dealing with accepting proceedings to be held remotely through electronic means of communications. And so there is, the Egyptian courts are really helping arbitration, are really arbitration friendly. My last point is that, yes, of course, despite the importance of the infrastructure, of the legal infrastructure, also, as mentioned by a Queen Mary survey a few years ago, the place of arbitration has an impact also, like the language and the culture, the location. All this makes the arbitration center familiar and encourage the users to use the institution. So I think all of these elements really contributed to Corsica's success. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dalia, and I fully concur. I mean, in more than 40 years of existence, we can definitely see how the Cairo Center and also Cairo as a seat has developed, obviously, as one of the most prominent seats in the region. It would be then interesting then probably to shift, as many of our participants may know, the UAE offers a very rich, and I would say in a certain ways, quite of a unique approach to jurisdictions, in that there are what is often referred to scholarly to enclaves or jurisdictional enclaves, meaning the UAE being predominantly civil law jurisdictions, which also hosts within it jurisdictions which we often refer to as offshore or offshore divide, whereby English common law courts tend to sit, and I'm particularly referring to the DIFC, the Dubai International Financial Center, and more recently, over the past few years, the ADGM, the Abu Dhabi Global Market, and the capital of the UAE, which is Abu Dhabi. So I would, in this regard, I would be very also pleased to hear from Robert, whose center, the DIFC LCIA, sits within the DIFC, to see how sort of Robert, the DIFC LCIA has been around for more than 10 years. And it would be good to see how the DIFC as a seat has shaped and contributed to the success of your center.
Thanks very much, Sarah. And I just want to extend my personal thanks to everyone that's participating and that has joined us today, and also to the Chartered Institute for Arbitrators for organising the event this afternoon, and also the series as a whole. As a former member of the Global Steering Committee for the YMG, and also the chair of the UAE branch of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, I know how much work and effort goes into events like this, particularly if it's a series of events that take place in a number of jurisdictions, and it's a huge amount of work and effort. So well done to everyone. I think, look, first point I'm going to make is not going to answer the question, which is typical lawyerly approach. But one thing I wanted to say is that at the outset of this, Sarah mentioned that there are over 40 institutions in this part of the world, and that is exciting, I think. The really interesting thing from my perspective is that we're in such a unique place here in the United Arab Emirates, because we have 12 of those 40 here in the United Arab Emirates. And that's just bonkers when you think about it and compare it to what the position is in other parts of the world. Going to the question and going to my answer, I think my answer is pretty short. The answer is tremendously. The safe seat of the DIFC has made a massive impact on the growth and the development of the DIFC LCA as an arbitration centre. As many of you will know, the DIFC was established in 2004, and the arbitration law, like Egypt, based on the Untitled model law, was enacted in 2008, and that coincided with the establishment of the DIFC LCA as an arbitration centre, which at that time was essentially a joint venture between the LCA and the DIFC authority at that point in time to create an independent arbitral institution here in the United Arab Emirates that brought international best practice and standards and rules to this part of the world. The DIFC is now home to close to 2,500 companies, boasts its own judicial system and legal framework, as Sarah already mentioned, which is based on English common law, and that is separate and distinct from the federal UAE and Dubai legal systems and courts. And in the past 5 years alone, we as an institution or as a centre have seen a 425% increase to the number of cases that have been referred to the DIFC LCA Arbitration Centre. And I think that is no coincidence. I think as the legal framework has grown and developed and bedded in over the course of the last 12 to 13 years or so has the use of the DIFC LCA Arbitration Centre. And why do people choose the DIFC as a seat versus perhaps an onshore seat, or a seat somewhere else, such as Paris or London or Singapore or Hong Kong? I think there's lots of reasons for choosing the DIFC as a seat. I think one obvious reason is parties still want to have a seat in the region where they're contracting and where their disputes are likely to arise, and the DIFC, with its common law system and separate distinct courts, is a fantastic opportunity for people to get the best of both worlds. They can have perhaps what they would expect to see and experience in a more established jurisdiction such as Paris or London, but have it here in the Middle East. So parties have access to the supervision and the support of the DIFC court, which is not only for enforcement purposes, but also for obtaining interim relief. That's often or historically been seen as positive when compared to the position at a federal level. The DIFC courts now have a proven arbitration-friendly track record of disposing of disputes in English and according to common law principles. That gives people certainty, and I think that ultimately draws people to the centre as a seat. Our awards can be directly enforced throughout the MENA region and also in the UAE as a whole, which I think is very positive. And I think what we have seen over the life of the centre, just as a closing point, is an increase in the number of parties that select the DIFC as a seat, rather than perhaps Dubai or Paris or London. And where things stand today is that at nearly 70% of all parties to DIFC LSA arbitrations choose the DIFC as a seat. And they do that because they see it as a safe and secure seat of arbitration. And I think that's a fantastic change in fortune. At the outset of this experiment, the vast majority of parties would have chosen a seat in Dubai or perhaps London or Paris, and we've seen that change quite dramatically in a relatively short space of time. So the short answer is tremendously.
Thanks very much, Robert. And then I think based on the recent developments also in the DIFC, and particularly the DIFC courts, which have recently also established and launched a DIFC courts arbitration dedicated working group in view also of enhancing the expertise of its judiciary with respect to arbitration related litigation matters. Can I hear then, Chris, obviously, I mean, the Saudi Center is sort of a younger, compared to the Cairo Center, for example, a younger yet very dynamic institution. And what would be helpful to hear from you is to which extent Riyadh as a seat has possibly contributed to supporting the exponential growth we've seen over the past few years after the creation of the center.
Thank you much, Sarah, and also welcome to everyone, and thank you again for the invitation to speak with you today. Listen, there's no doubt that a safe seat and safe infrastructure to arbitration is absolutely key and essential to this. Legislation has to be in place, judiciary has to play along, otherwise it is a lost concept. With regard to Saudi Arabia or KSA, we've been very blessed to have a very active government at the moment that really is pushing hard. As you may know, KSA has been a member of the New York Convention, a signatory to the New York Convention since 1994, but more recently, the seat has been really bolstered by new arbitration law in 2012, which is based on the UNCITRAL model law. And in 2012-13, also new enforcement law came into play. Now, what does that mean for us? We have now an environment where you have full discretion to choose the applicable law, the institutional rules, such as the SCCA, the language, the seat, and of course, the arbitrator, very important. In addition to that, the court supports the parties in ad hoc arbitrations as well. Think of appointing arbitrators, interim measures, witness subpoenas, letter rogatories. But perhaps most importantly, the enforcement is always at stake when you ask around, and foreign investors will always ask you, what is the situation with the outcome? How can you enforce? Can you enforce? What's the quota? Just came across an article just the other day where the Ministry of Justice revealed that the enforcement of arbitration awards rose in the last 5 years from 930 awards to 8,946. So that's a whopping 862%. It's quite a statement. What was for us most important, I guess, in the last 2 years was a decree from 2019 that really boosted our business. That royal decree basically opened the doors to state and state-owned entities to now engage in arbitration with foreign investors after obtaining permission by the Prime Minister. And it especially mentions the SCCA. So that was, again, a very welcome boost that really threw open the doors for international arbitration. And the interest has been tremendous ever since. Other things that have happened then in 2019, which was also very important for the seat, is the implementation of the so-called government tender and procurement law, which in essence simplified the process of getting that approval, because now you just need approval from the finance minister, no longer the prime minister, which, as you can imagine, is hard to get these days. Franchise law came into play sometimes later, also boosts ADR. So again, all doors are open for ADR and KSA right now. And we're seeing a lot of rapid reforms also in the judicial aspects. For example, we have now a new 2020 commercial court law that now also includes court-mandated mediation and conciliation for certain claims. And again, you need to go through that process before you can see a judge. So all in all, a very strong move towards arbitration friendliness. And that in turn really has helped the SCA to grow and flourish in the last years. Sarah?
Thank you very much, Chris. And I think we've all seen the recent developments as well in Saudi, and the exponential also number of judgments that are favorable, and definitely send out a positive signal to further support the development of arbitration in Saudi. Now, I'll shift over to Pavel. And Pavel, as I've noted, there has been a significant increase in the number of arbitral institutions present in the region. And often, probably, if we bring the number of arbitral institutions to the number of cases that are out there, probably we will end up with a sort of extremely high ratio. Yeah. So can we really talk about sort of looking at the overall landscape? Can we talk about a form of institutional competition? We all know DIAC is also one of the most respected institutions in the region that has been sort of locally brought and has, gained a regional, if not also an international edge. So can we talk about an institutional competition? And if so, how has DIAC positioned itself sort of internationally and regionally in view of addressing such a competition, if and where you believe such a competition exists?
Thank you, Sarah, and welcome everyone to this seminar, and thank you for having me. So to answer your question, of course, there could not be an ambiguous answer to it, and although probably my colleagues have different views, but in my opinion, especially from the perspective that DIAC is a non-profit organization, there is no such thing as institutional competition, or at least not a direct one. As our ultimate goal of DIAC and of the other institutions is the social benefit, and if one's benefit lies with another institution, of course our goal is achieved. However, if there is some sort of competition, it probably lies on the level of constantly improving the services in providing efficient administration of cases, having clear and effective rules which are updated to the best international practices, also maintaining a pool of experienced and trusted arbitrators who are known to deliver on time, and to deliver a quality result. However, the above should not be driven purely by competition, but maybe by the interest of the parties which entrusted us in settling their disputes. So to answer your question, I do not believe that there is such notion as competition between the centers, especially because all of the centers, I believe, they're naturally limited to their respective regions. And apart maybe from the ICC and LCIA, I do not believe that most of the centers have such extensive international reach. For an example, I can say that although in the past decade, DIAC registers over 250 cases each year on average, even in some years during the last finance crisis, we had more than 200 cases per year, 400 cases, sorry. But only a very small fraction from this number is actually between parties which are not in any way related to Dubai or the UAE, or let's say that are purely international, that are foreign to the UAE. And even in these situations, I might say that the parties choose, even if they are foreign and they have no relation to the UAE, they are choosing DIAC. I cannot speak for the other centers, of course, but they're choosing DIAC mostly to have impartial decision on their dispute, and this is mostly driven by the desire of the parties, especially the ones that do not have the power position in the negotiations, to have their dispute settled in the seat of the party which has this position of power. But still, these foreign countries are countries from the region. They are not. We cannot reasonably expect, of course, to have, for example, two UK-based entities to just come and have their dispute settled in Dubai. Also, in furtherance to what I've said, this is also normal for each center to be limited to their region, because I think also Robert touched this point, is that basically all the parties usually they want and prefer to play on their own turf. And even from my practice as an attorney from before, the parties, our clients for which we drafted contracts, vigorously insisted on having their disputes settled in their country of origin. Even when we provided them with numerous examples of the benefits of choosing a foreign alternative, they still insisted on having Dubai, the courts, or the Dubai International Arbitration Center as the authority which will settle their disputes. And the same basically applies not only to the parties, but it applies also to their councils, which, let's face it, are the ones that are the most important part of the puzzle, let's say, because they're the ones drafting the agreements. The arbitration agreements have influence on their clients in choosing a particular institution. And as an example for Dubai, of course, UK councils, which prefer for their disputes, for their clients' disputes to be settled under the English law, or I mean, even the common law traditions, they usually choose the DIFCL-CIA, and on the opposite, the civil law lawyers will prefer the rules and SIT which are based on the civil law tradition. Yes, Sarah.
Perfect. I mean, I think that gives us a very good flavor to sort of what's happening really on the ground in the Middle East in terms of sort of arbitral practice. And obviously the session today, as we move along, we will address as well, you know, other, I think, hot topics shortly. But I would like just briefly to hear from Dr. Dalia with respect to the positioning of the center. Obviously, if we look at the name of the Corsica, what is now dubbed as Corsica, we can see regional within the term. So we could see that the positioning has been from the outset a regional positioning. Could I please hear from you, Dr. Dalia, as to, you know, first of all, if you agree with Pavel that there isn't really such a thing as an institutional competition out here, and then second of all, probably how has your positioning sort of evolved from the premise positioning, which was at the outset sort of a regional one?
Thank you. Yes, I agree that there is no like real competition. We prefer to say that there is more cooperation, I think, than competition, because I mean, all institutions wish to, yes, of course you wish to increase your caseload, of course you wish to have, you know, more users. But again, I think if we all cooperate to, you know, promote best practices, to share best practices, to train young practitioners and organize, you know, events and writings, I think this will lead ultimately to like the credibility of the institutions will be enhanced, and then it will result, I think, in a broader market for all institutions. So we will all have like more users, I think. And again, I believe that if there is any competition, we should never lose, I mean, we should always have in mind that our main purpose is to serve justice. And this is how I think institutions should act, having this in mind, that you are serving justice, and then any efforts you have to make should be within this broader framework of serving justice. For the Cairo Center, I think, yes, we were like the rationale behind the establishment of these regional centers was to increase the awareness of arbitration in the Asian and African region. I think the center is doing its best to do that. And probably later when we talk about like the appointment of arbitrators and diversity, this is also reflected. Corsica, we have like each year we register around 80 or 90 cases. Last year we only registered 67 cases, which show a bit of the impact of the COVID. But overall, we had until today, since the establishment of Corsica, we registered 1,474 cases in almost all economic sectors. For the 2020 cases, we had 67 cases, 20% of them involved foreign parties. Interestingly, these foreign parties are coming, of course, from the region, but also from Europe, you know, UK, Greece, we have Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, and also Sudan usually comes, you know, as frequent, like Sudanese party are frequent users of the center too. And of course, these figures do not include Egyptian companies with foreign shareholders. We are only counting companies that are really incorporated outside Egypt. So I think this is like where we are right now.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dalia. And I think that some of the participants concur with your remarks. However, just to probably finish this loop, I would really like to hear Mark's view. I mean, we know that the ICC, International Court of Arbitration, has been in existence now for over 100 years, you know, solving disputes globally. And the ICC also historically has had a very active presence in the region, which one also based on the recent developments, which you'll share with us, I understand, Mark, is going to further enhance ICC's positioning in the region. So can I please ask you, Mark, how sort of the positioning as well of the ICC has probably shifted or evolved in the region as well?
Thank you very much, Sarah, for having me during this webinar, and thanks for the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators for providing and for organizing this sequence of events. It's a great pleasure to be here with you today. So thank you very much for referring to a situation of positioning rather than competition. I think it's well said. And on that front, I wanted just to, first of all, concur with Dr. Dalia and with Pavel on the fact that all institutions have one goal, which is serving justice and also creating an arbitration-friendly environment, which is everyone's goal. And once this goal is achieved, I think all institutions will have the increase of the cases that we're all looking for. So in terms of positioning, with regards to the ICC, of course, with the opening of the new case management team in Abu Dhabi, this came at a point in time where there is a huge increase of number of cases in the Middle East. But maybe let me take you back to the 1990s and just walk with you through what has happened since. So since the entry into force of the 1998 ICC arbitration rules, there were some usual, let's say, suspects or users of arbitration in the region. Mainly, I'm talking about Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, and also the UAE. And as of 2008, we have seen an important increase in the number of cases that are filed from parties who are mainly originating from other countries like Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia. And we have seen a huge increase, almost the double, with regards to parties emanating from the United Arab Emirates. And this increase is still ongoing, and which also explains why today the ICC is opening a case management team there. And just as a reminder, I want to add that in terms of overseas offices for the ICC, there is not only the ADGM, the case management team within the ADGM, but there are also 5 other offices, out of which there are 4 overseas offices in New York, Sao Paulo, Hong Kong, and Singapore, of course, and Paris. But all these offices are there because there's this huge number of cases. And just to give you an example, the ICC recorded a total number of cases of 946 new arbitrations, which is actually the highest number of cases registered since 2016. It's true, different from other institutions, but the COVID year, if I may call it, marked this huge number or increase in the number of the cases. Over to you, Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. And I think all the users in the region have very much welcomed eagerly the recent developments with the opening of a representative office a few years ago, and then obviously the recent news with respect to the establishment of a case management office, which I think the opening of which is due imminently within the next weeks. So I believe this is obviously and undoubtedly a very positive development and commitment as well by the ICC towards the future of arbitration in the region. But again, I say this with a pinch of salt because we will then probably, as we further go along, debate whether or not such a future is definitely bright or probably more nuanced. However, also before we wrap up on this section, which is sort of dealing with the role and interplay of arbitral institutions and the overall landscape of Middle East arbitrations, it would be great to hear from Robert, particularly to his views and his respective institutions' views as to which extent do arbitral institutions more generally, and the DIFC-LCIA more particularly, have played a role in fostering such a rich and arbitration-friendly environment. And if I may as well ask you, Robert, to tell us probably what has the DIFC-LCIA done in terms of sort of raising awareness about arbitration, ADR, and more generally education and training on that front to the community.
Thanks, Sarah. It's a nice segue, I think, to the point that I would have made if I had been speaking to the point that we've just heard, which is, I think, notwithstanding the fact that arbitral institutions don't compete with each other, I think there should be a recognition that a bit of competition is a good thing, and that what it does do is it ensures that other arbitral institutions step up to the plate. And so if one institution in a particular region is doing an exceptional job at delivering administrative services to an international standard and the others in that region perhaps aren't doing the same, it does encourage others to up the game, as Pavel said, and I think that can only be but a good thing. And tied to that are initiatives of the arbitral institutions in the region, and I think in particular this region that we're talking about today it is superb for that. We have a number of institutions that regularly host training, events, and participate in the organization of symposia across the whole of the region, not just in the place where they traditionally do business. And I think that's a really good thing, because what it does do is it educates, and the more we educate, the more the standards increase and improve, and the better the practice is. What have we done as an institution to help with that? Well, I think, you know, as we've already heard from Dalia and Pavel, and to a certain extent from Mark, a lot of this is about access to justice. A lot of this is about making sure that are representing those parties have access to the systems to resolve disputes efficiently. And so one of the things that we have done is take our rules and have those rules translated into Arabic, which is an unofficial translation. It's not the final version of the rules. The rules are in English. They were drafted in English. We administer our cases in multiple languages, but we always go back to the English version of the rules. But we have Arabic translations of those rules, and we'll be soon launching Arabic translations of our 2021 rules to ensure that non-native English speakers in the region that perhaps have Arabic as a first language can have a better understanding of what it is to conduct an arbitration under the DFCLC arbitration rules or mediation rules for that matter. We also have a series of events, and we're just in the process of actually refreshing some of those, where we're working with the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, we're working with law firms, and we're seeking to essentially take people through the arbitration process, not necessarily under our rules, just the arbitration process as a whole. And that can be lawyers, that can be in-house counsel, that can be lay people, so that they have a better understanding of how the process works. And I think that can only be but a good thing. And I suppose the big initiative that we have really been involved in, together with our colleagues at DIAC and our colleagues at the ICC and SCCA and in Cairo is driving forward Arbitration Week in Dubai and supporting Arbitration Week in other parts of the world as well. And we've seen that event, particularly Dubai Arbitration Week, grow tremendously over the course of the last 5 years. And it now is really a staple on the international arbitration calendar, and it draws in parties, it draws in lawyers, it draws in practitioners from around the globe, and it really is a fantastic showcase of what is going on in the region and the engagement that we have here. And it's only been but a good thing, I think, for not only advertising the region and the institutions that are doing business and working in the region, but also advertising that it is a safe place to have disputes resolved. And just one final point to that, I think it goes to the point that we made earlier on about the number of arbitral institutions that we have in the region and the number that we have in the UAE. You know, if you were to take the number of arbitrations, institutional arbitrations that take place in the United Arab Emirates in any given year, and add them all up across all of the centres and add them all up, you'd very quickly realise that there are more institutional arbitrations taking place at the institutions here in the United Arab Emirates than there are at the LCIA as a whole, at CIAC as a whole, and it's actually not far off ICC on an average year. And I think that is something that we don't talk about enough. There is an appetite for institutional arbitration in this region. There is an appetite for disputes to be resolved by institutional arbitration in this region, and it is taking place on a day-by-day basis, and it's taking place efficiently and effectively, and that's a good thing.
Thank you, Robert, for highlighting, I think, this very noteworthy comment is that indeed there is definitely an appetite and a growing appetite for also to have these disputes as well in a certain way and a certain extent also resolved sort of locally, if I could use this term. Mark, to which extent do you believe, and we know the ICC is also very active and the forefront and also drive an annual sort of conference, which is also one of the big ticket items as well with respect to attendance and also what drives and pulls together regionally, not only locally here in the UAE, which is the ICC MENA conference. But to which extent do you believe that the ICC has actually played a role in fostering an arbitration sort of friendly environment, and to which extent do you believe that institutions should or must play a role in sort of trying or attempting to a little bit engage in a level playing field exercise?
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Robert. So as Robert mentioned, there is a growth of appetite for institutional arbitration. And with this growth of appetite of institutional arbitration, there is an obligation, I believe, towards the users from the arbitration institutions in fostering this arbitration-friendly environment, either through the institutional arbitration rules that are in several languages or case management teams, trainings, or any other means that would lead to that effect. Of course, within the ICC, with the presence of the two main bodies of the ICC dispute resolution system, being the ICC court and the Secretariat, Through the years, the Secretariat and the court have developed several practices in order to reach this level of confidence from the ICC users and arbitration users in general. And this starts with the day-to-day case management of arbitration and the close link with counsel, arbitrators, parties, and having an ongoing conversation with all these users of the arbitration system in clarifying how the rules are being conducted, how the decisions are being taken by the court, and going to the court. The court has developed several practices, and through its different decisions, either on the constitution of arbitrary tribunals, different decisions on financial aspect, challenges, confirmation of arbitrators, and mainly the scrutiny of awards, which safeguards the enforceability of awards before state courts. The ICC has developed a great number of practices and help towards ensuring that this obligation of fostering an arbitration-friendly environment throughout the years. Of course, this also, as I said, is related to the ICC court's long experience in taking some decisions. And just to shed the light on some examples in relation to the ICC. The ICC recently has been acting as amicus curiae in 2 separate hearings, determining on one hand what defines an arbitral institution, and on the other hand, when an arbitrator should disclose some information. And in these 2 situations where the ICC has acted as amicus curiae, all of the practice and all of the knowledge and information that the ICC has developed was more or less used during these court proceedings. And I'm just going to be quoting one part that was mentioned by the Egyptian Supreme Court in relation to the sham arbitration that we all know about in Saudi Arabia, and for which there was a enforcement proceedings before the US state courts. The Egyptian Supreme Court determined, I'm quoting, that like the Court of Arbitration and the National Chamber of Commerce, any institution should be also taking example of that. So again, just to shed the light on the fact that I think all institutions today are aware of the importance of increasing the arbitration-friendly environment, and I think they're all, either through fair competition or also positioning, are helping and contributing towards such environment. And actually, I believe that the high number of cases that we are seeing today in the region or outside is actually showing that all institutions are contributing towards that effect. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Mark and Robert, for providing sort of over, which I fully agree with. I think indeed arbitral institutions have sort of probably in a way sometimes an involuntary obligation, which have probably shifted to being a more of an engagement or commitment by institutions. We would like now to shift a little bit over the dice and shift the floor actually to our participants. And so by way of contribution, we would like to ask participants, please, to vote on the questions that's popping out. There will be a series of questions throughout the session, and the answers are going to be collated by the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, who at the end of the ADR World Tour are going to publish the statistics per region. So I would highly encourage all participants with us today to please answer the questions.
Separately, while you're all doing that, I would just like to say, if anyone does want to submit a question and have that answered by a member of the panel, please do so. We have received 3 questions so far. I've answered 2 of them, and I think there's 1 still to be answered. But feel free to chip in into the conversation. It's important that we have an open dialogue and that you all feel like you can participate in this. So please send us a message on the chat or through the question and answer session.
Yeah, exactly. So we will be dealing with any questions towards the end of the session if time permits. Otherwise, we will be typing the answers in the chat box as well. And you know, someone asked about the ADR services. This is a topic, obviously, given the theme of our discussion, that will also be addressed throughout the later on. And then we will pop up another question as well for everyone. That's interesting. 60% private. That's again confirms that appetite towards, you know, ADR resolution of disputes. And so what barriers exist which currently prevent access to justice? I will shortly display the results up on the screen just to allow enough voters. All right. Well, we will now be moving after we will see the results. If we can see the results popping up. Okay, quite interesting. The costs is sort of the predominant, and the duration, more or less, and the lack of knowledge or awareness. Hence, I think the point that was touched upon earlier by Robert and Mark with respect to the importance of sort of the raising of awareness and education. Now we'll move on to the second sort of theme of today's discussion, which is a theme which also is important in a sense that it also commands and drives the quality of the services provided by the arbitral institutions, which often relates to the quality and the pool available and selected ultimately of the decision makers in the process, which obviously are the arbitrators. So I would like to ask Chris to provide us of an overview of, I wouldn't call it policy, but it would be good to hear from you, Chris. How does the SCCA make appointments, and what factors does your institution take into account when effecting such appointments?
Certainly, thank you, Sarah. And when talking about appointments and given the outcome of the last survey about costs, I should perhaps lead with the fact that we have just revised our Appendix 1, which is on costs of arbitration, and that will be hopefully soon rolled out in the near future. That will dramatically, we hope, will reduce costs when it comes also to the appointment of arbitrators or arbitration in general. Now, coming to your question as to what the SCCA does in terms of appointing arbitrators, what are our policies, what are our rules? Let me start by saying that the SCCA rules are in this regard dispositive in nature. That means parties will, of course, be able to agree to whatever selection method they are agreeable to. So you can choose how you wish to find your arbitrator. You can even agree to that arbitrator name, and that's fine. If there's an impasse, the SCCA approach here is to have a so-called administrative conference call very early in the process, usually around 7 to 10 days after the initiation, where any impasses or gaps in the selection method will be addressed in order to close whatever needs to be closed, in order to ensure that whatever they had tried to agree to actually works and functions. Absent agreement, or whenever 45 days lapse as a safety net, or the parties even fail to proceed with whatever they had to agree to in terms of the selection method, the SCCA will make an administrative appointment. That is, the SCCA will step in according to Article 12 and basically appoint the arbitrator for the parties. Perhaps worth mentioning that when you have multiple parties, other issues can arise in a multi-party context. In that case, the SCCA may appoint all arbitrators. I will leave it with that just in case Mark wants to pitch on the DUTCO issue, but I think we should otherwise rest on that point. The SCCA has a roster of arbitrators and mediators, so we took it upon ourselves to go that extra mile to really create a roster. It's a lot of work. but it really paid off, particularly in a market as young as the case A, where you have a lot of ad hoc arbitration, but only for 4 years now institutional arbitration. Here, pitching back to the initiatives, a lot of education went into this roster development, training back and forth. A lot of webinars have occurred. It's a very high demand, but also very stringent filter that we apply when we let arbitrators and mediators into our roster. Why is that important? Because one of the things that we do is called a strike and rank list method. So whenever parties on our administrative conference call early in the process may say, we haven't agreed to a selection method in the arbitration agreement, we're not quite sure what to do, can you help? Can you as a CA tell us what you would recommend? Our recommendation then would be, and which you also find in Article 12, is to go with what we generally call a list method or a strike and rank list method, whereby parties give us the qualifications, experience they want to see the candidates to have on that list, and then they get a list, an identical list, and they strike the names they do not like, no reasons given, and rank the remaining names. The highest ranked arbitrator will then be the appointee. So that's a very efficient process because it leaves powers in the hands of the council, and you don't relinquish all the powers when it comes to the appointment process. The roster, by the way, is around 350 roster members, 20 areas of expertise, 24 nationalities, up to 20 languages. What is also relevant, perhaps, and that goes to your second question, what are the factors that we look at? Our rules say that the candidates shall be suitable, and that's a very vague term. And it also says they shall be available to serve. The latter one, of course, goes to the temporal issue that sometimes arbitrators overcommit, something we try to avoid when we make that first call before even we appoint or invite. Now, in terms of suitability, we look at expertise, subject matter expertise. Are you experienced in that industry? Be it infrastructure, be it construction, maritime, telecommunications, whatever it is. Qualifications could be bar certifications whatsoever. Language, nationality, and particularly in this region, we're also very keen on ensuring that there is sufficient cultural experience when it comes to particularly international cases, which we've seen a couple of them already. So those are the factors we look at when we compile lists or otherwise make administrative appointments. Perhaps in that wake, to be mentioned as well, we have now a couple of ad hoc services or limited services, we call them, for the ad hoc market. Parties can now come to us for a so-called list-only service. You just want a list from us from arbitrators, 5, 10, 15 names. The second service is a list and appointment service. It builds on the first service, but now we also appoint and address any challenges and decide them and substitute, of course. And the third service is what we commonly refer to as the administrative appointment. Without further party direction, we appoint an arbitrator. Sarah?
Thank you, Chris. And I think that sheds a lot of light and clarity on sort of the appointment mechanism, which is often what both counsel but also parties would tend to look at and consider, because as we all know, one of the most important sort of steps in any arbitration is the constitution of the tribunal, which is made up of those decision makers, the arbitrators. So can I ask Dr. Dalia, what is sort of the factors that you take into account at the Cairo Regional Center in view of sort of implementing your and putting and affecting appointments, and how obviously these tend to typically be made, if there's any nuances that our participants could be made aware of?
Okay, thank you. So basically the process is very similar to what Chris has just mentioned. Just to note that the cases where the center is invited to appoint arbitrators are very few, actually. So like, for instance, last year we only were invited to appoint arbitrator only in around 14% of the cases. In most of the cases, the party does not appoint themselves their arbitrators. So yes, again, the priority is to the parties' autonomy, the parties' will. So we proceed through lists according to our rules. So we send a list to the parties and they classify the arbitrators in the same way Chris mentioned. The elements we take into consideration, of course, are nationality of the parties. According to the rules, we should try to have different nationalities than the parties in the arbitral tribunal. Also, the complexity of the dispute, the language, the applicable law. So we tend to put on the list arbitrators familiar with the applicable law. the economic or field of the dispute too. And also our own experience with the arbitrators. So we have arbitrators who either are not available, delay awards. So these are elements that we take into consideration whenever we put arbitrators' name on the list. The center is also trying to implement a diversity policy. So we are encouraging a lot arbitrators under 40, gender and geographical diversity. So in many of our lists includes arbitrator under 40, young practitioner, female arbitrators, and so on. So we're trying actually to push diversity through either direct appointments, which are very rare, or through the list we send to the parties to choose among them.
Thank you, Dr. Dalia. And I think it would be very helpful for us to hear from Pavel with respect to DIAC's approach towards appointments and also the factors that DIAC would typically take into account when making such appointments.
Thank you, Sarah. I don't think that I can add much to what my colleagues said before me, because normally the appointment process is more or less the same in all the centers. Of course, the number one factor, as I've said before, is the interest of the parties. So as such, we are always honoring the choice of the parties of their nominated arbitrators. If they're not, if they fail to nominate an arbitrator, this is the appointment is done by the executive committee of DIAC. And of course, as Dr. Dalia said, many factors are taken into account when direct appointments are made. The subject of the case, the complexity, the value, the language, even the maybe the counsels, because let's say sometimes if both parties are represented by local law firms, we appoint an arbitrator who is more experienced in the region and also have a knowledge of the Arabic culture, even because you know, this is something a significant part of the process also. And maybe as future developments, now we are revamping our list of registered arbitrators from the participants who wants to apply. There is a link on our website. Our executive committee adopted a new criteria, which is more strict, and we are aiming to be more transparent in the appointments. So the criteria and the list of arbitrators will be published, so the parties are sure who will try their dispute. And also, yes, maybe last thing is in the new rules, the new DIAC rules that are expected hopefully by the end of the year. We also, as Chris said, we are adding an alternative process for appointment, which will give the parties more flexibility by giving and receiving lists of arbitrators, striking out names, and at the end, whatever is agreed, it will be honored by the executive committee when appointing an arbitrator.
Thank you very much, Pavel. I think that's very, very helpful for the participants to know, and I think we're all very much looking forward to the release of the new iteration of the DIAC rules. Dr. Dalia touched upon a very important issue and is currently a sort of a driving force in modern arbitration, which is diversity. And diversity, as we all know, sort of takes different forms and shapes. And it would be really great to hear from Mark with respect to how the ICC, for example, has been approaching diversity and addressing as well diversity.
Thank you very much, Sarah. So the ICC Court is committed to expanding the global pool of arbitrators and recognizes the importance of appointing, of course, arbitrators from different nationalities, age, and of course, promoting gender and geographical diversity. In July 2018, this marked a historical moment for the ICC court by balancing the male-female ratio of court members. The panel of appointed YAF representatives for the 2019-2021 mandate was also very diverse and marked as well a ratio of gender with 38 women and 34 men from 46 countries, of course, reflecting the ICC's continuous effort to promote age, gender, and diversity. And in 2019 as well, there was 21% of the arbitrators confirmed or appointed by the court were women. And for your information, the ICC report on statistics for 2019 is available online, which reflects actually the numbers I'm just sharing with you. And as well, every year there are new nationalities of arbitrators. So 2019 marked a record with 6 new nationalities of arbitrators in comparison to 2018 or 2017, where there was only 1 new nationality. And in terms of practice, the court allows younger and less experienced arbitrators to gain the experience needed in smaller cases, and also especially in expedited procedure provisions, EPP cases, where it is, and most of the time it's an opportunity for promoting younger arbitrators and appointing them in such cases so they can gain the experience needed for bigger cases. Over to you, Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mark. And I think there has been an increased or heightened role of diversity in the region as well, from what I could see, also supporting the development that we've seen as well in the region in terms of the growth of arbitration and that appetite that we see both from users and the community of practitioners as a whole. Will now be, before we move on to sort of the last theme of today's session, which is going to address the future of alternative dispute resolution in the Middle East, I would like also again to shift the dice back to our participants and ask them to answer the question that has just popped up, which is what dispute resolution fora is most prevalent during the pandemic? All right. All right, and we'll shortly be displaying the results up on the screen. If all right, that's quite interesting. I think it prompts a little bit of an interesting remark here, is that the participants have indicated cost to be one of sort of the main factors that they would take into account, but nevertheless, they believe that arbitration has been one of the most sort of developed form of dispute resolution during the pandemic. So that's quite interesting. So now we move on to the fourth question, which is which ADR or alternative dispute resolution form is having the most effective impact? So we're here addressing effectiveness within your region as a force of good during the pandemic. And so we'll display the results up for everyone's and just while we await the results, which have just come in, all right, so it's interesting to see that Right. Arbitration sort of still takes the headway going forward. That's interesting. So this gives us a very good door opener to the next sort of topic, which also was part of one of the questions that were raised as well, which is also the impact, more or less. And the question was with respect to sort of electronically or the shifting of arbitration towards more virtual means. And I think maybe to take the question backwards from the other side, we all know that the COVID pandemic was unexpected and definitely had an impact on the conduct of arbitrations and will most likely have an everlasting impact once we're out of the pandemic, hopefully soon. So it would be great to hear from Robert as to what was the COVID impact on your arbitral practice, and what measures or initiatives have you sort of had to take in order to address this unprecedented event?
Thanks, Sarah. It's interesting to see the answers to those questions 3 and question 4, because actually, in particular, the response to question 3, it matches the experience that we've had at the institution in 2020 and certainly in the first 2 months of this year. To put it into perspective, we had an increased caseload like most of the arbitral institutions in 2020. And I think part of that at least can be put down to the COVID-19 pandemic. And in particular, we saw a 40% increase to the number of arbitrations that were registered in 2020 as compared to 2019. And as things currently stand in the first 2 months of this year, we're currently up to 80% of an increase versus 2020. So I think the short, crass answer is the impact has been direct, and it has led to busyness that perhaps we didn't necessarily have before. But I think that the broad overarching point is that we as an institution were, I think, well placed to deal with the pandemic. We already had the ability to move the team into remote working pretty quickly. And I think when we did that on the 16th of March, 2020, we did so without a great deal of fanfare, and I think the vast majority of parties wouldn't have recognised there was much of a difference in the level of service that was being provided. And what I would do is I would congratulate all of my colleagues at the other institutions for doing exactly the same thing. You very rarely hear anyone complaining that their arbitration wasn't administered in those initial days and weeks, and certainly in 2020, I think all of the institutions did a fantastic job of pivoting and dealing with the pandemic and having their staff working remotely. As an institution, we have always accepted requests for arbitration and documentation and submissions from parties electronically. And we, like all of the other institutions, encouraged everyone to commence their proceedings electronically, whether that was by email or by using our online filing system. And I know that the other institutions did exactly that. We encouraged our parties and our users to pay us in a contactless way, making direct payments to us via bank transfer or depositing a check, and not popping down to the office with bags of cash, which most of us don't accept in any event. We have always primarily corresponded with arbitrators, parties and counsel in an electronic way in any event. And so from that perspective, there really was no change. It was just sitting in your home office rather than at work. But it has changed, I think, that how we as a team have worked. And I think it's changed the way we work for the better, in the sense that we have a very collaborative working environment now, using tools like Zoom and others to keep in contact with each other on a day-to-day basis. The office is now, and always has been, fully functional and open like many of the other institutions, particularly in this region. We do have a skeleton staff in the office, and we do have the vast majority of our people working from home at this point in time. And that's just really from a safeguarding perspective. The last thing you want to do when you run a lean team is have one person get COVID-19 and pass it on to everyone else. And so we still have the vast majority of our casework team working remotely and working from home, but we do envisage that changing over time. Parties have increased the use of virtual hearings, we've seen, And so I think that goes to answering Mohammed Yassin Bouchefa's question, which was, do we see arbitration in the future becoming more using electronic forms more and more? And I think it's fair to say, yes, we do. And I think people have generally had a positive experience when they have tried to conduct a hearing electronically. And I think parties will want to do that in the future. And I think some of the concerns that people had about doing that at the outset of the pandemic have largely been were largely misconceived, and perhaps have been proven not to be necessarily too much of a problem in reality. And I think what we all can be very proud about is that the wheels of arbitration have continued to move, and there hasn't been this situation where the pandemic has led to the arbitration wheels grinding to a stop, proceedings not being administered, cases not being able to be filed. And a glut of cases to having to be dealt with once the pandemic passes. I think what we have demonstrated as a group of institutions is that we can keep moving and adapt and allow parties to get access to justice and have their disputes resolved in an efficient and effective way. And I think it's something that all institutions, together with the governments and the parties and the users, can all be very proud of, because we've all, I think, made an effort in our own little way to ensure that we can proceed at this time.
Thank you very much, Robert. And as counsel and arbitrator, I can only echo and congratulate obviously the successful and initiatives that were sort of done and under sort of extraneous and quite sometimes impeding circumstances as a result of COVID. And if I could probably say something, is that probably COVID has also further accelerated certain levels of the manner in which disputes are resolved, and even contributed further to to driving even a more efficient process. And indeed, there will be hopefully positive, everlasting impacts as a result of COVID. Now, there was a question in the chat box as to other forms of ADR, meaning alternative dispute resolution. And I would like to hear from Chris as to how the SCCA has responded to users' demands for the development of other forms of ADR, particularly mediation. And has such a demand, in your view, been impacted, whether there has been a positive or negative correlation as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic?
Thank you, Sarah. Indeed, aside from arbitration being apparently the survey love child, from what we have seen for the last two surveys, it has an initial investment. It also takes time. It's not that arbitration is done in like a 2-3 month time. At least that's what you don't usually get, let alone court proceedings that take much longer. But many clients had at some point during COVID literally empty war chests, meaning they didn't have the money to actually invest into an arbitration proceeding. Couple that with lack of court involvement, and you have a perfect storm. So what we focused on was to look at what I saw earlier also in the survey, these facilitating the negotiated contracts, that is to say, push mediation. We focused on that indeed. We had 50 mediations last year, which was a good number with a 2/3 settlement rate. But more than that, we also pushed a complete new project, which we refer to as the COVID-19 Emergency Mediation Program. In all brevity, in essence, all that it is, it's mediation all remotely done. And if a settlement follows, we have been certified as a conciliation center by the government to then also be able to convert that settlement agreement into enforceable bond or title. That, of course, has a lot of teeth, and it keeps you out of court, because all that happens in the end, you just have to enforce it in the end without having to go through it. Essentially, it's even better than a judgment or even an award for that matter, because it's non-appealable. So that worked out quite well. In addition to that, we also pushed further to find ground for parties to actually do mediation. We have introduced something called the Mediation Facilitation Service. Again, in essence, it is us stepping in and facilitating agreement between the parties, since sometimes claimants are not willing to talk to the other side for a variety of reasons. So an institution can help here. And aside from that, we have further pushed ad hoc services support. Think of a nomination project that we did for the appeals court. Think of administrative decision services, where we also decide now in ad hoc cases challenges, number of arbitrary disputes, place of arbitration disputes, And last but not least, we saw first emergency arbitration last year, which was very, very exciting. Sarah?
Thank you very much, Chris. And it would be good to have a comparative sort of overview from Dr. Dalia and sort of shifting continents and seeing what's happening in Cairo.
Well, it's Cairo is always, very specific. So, no, we have actually during 2020, we had less mediation cases. We have our mediation rules issued in 2013, but we registered less mediation cases in 2020 compared to 2019. However, there is a demand for a dispute resolution board under construction contracts, and Corsica we are about to launch DRB rules, hopefully by the beginning of next month. So I think this will have an impact on the other ADR mechanisms. We already have some requests to form DRBs according to the center rules. So I think this process alongside with mediation, I think it will hopefully it will succeed as ADR as an alternative way to arbitration too.
Thank you, Dr. Dalia. And Pavel, how are you seeing the increase for other forms of ADR? And probably I think the participants would be quite keen to hear from you with respect to the ADR service offering apart from arbitration that sits within DIAC.
Thank you, Sarah. Unfortunately, although we encourage not only arbitration, but for the part to use other methods of alternative dispute resolution, from our practice, we could say that conciliation and mediation, as we see it in the arbitration agreement submitted to DIAC, conciliation and mediation are mostly used as pre-escalation steps to arbitration, but they're never intended to be used effectively as a dispute resolution, because most of the times when we have conciliation cases, which are very rare, it's only because the parties need to meet the pre-escalation steps before filing the actual arbitration case. And another issue is that maybe because this is something that all our colleagues we should do to raise awareness of the other methods besides the arbitration, is at least in onshore Dubai, even the consolidation and mediation are not the people, the councils even, they cannot understand the notion behind it, and they're using it interchangeably. Sometimes even mediation and conciliation are confused with arbitration. And maybe here I need to appeal to all the participants to encourage their clients, if they're councils or if they're parties themselves, to use an experienced counsel in drafting the arbitration agreement and the dispute resolution clause, rather than to use something from the internet or from before which you cannot understand, and then to stack up with some procedures that you are not willing to follow, and probably to ruin your whole case.
Well, I can only, I cannot reiterate then as a lawyer, the emphasis and the importance of actually seeking guidance from counsel or lawyer or your legal representative, because obviously putting your feet without a proper or adequate crafting of your dispute resolution clause or even strategy can put you in a landmine thereafter. Hence the importance, I think, of the significance of properly drafting these clauses and initiatives that Robert has mentioned and alluded to earlier with respect to training and awareness raising that all of the institutions that we have on board today have been sort of engaging in. I would like to hear from Mark with regards to sort of the same question as to how the ICC has seen the development of other forms of ADR other than arbitration. We know that there's the ICC ADR center that sits as well within the ICC, but it would be good, Mark, please, if you could share with us how sort of you've seen the development or growth for appetite from users, and if there are any distinguishing factors or impacts that have resulted from the COVID pandemic.
Thank you very much, Sarah. So 2 main points. The first one is just to share with you some preliminary statistics for 2020, which revealed a record year for the ICC International Center for ADR. So the center registered 77 new cases in 2020, comprising a record of 45 mediations, 22 expertise proceedings, and 7 docket decks and 3 dispute board proceedings. So such increase was also combined with a strong commitment from the parties in partaking during the mediation process. It was no longer, we have seen, just a ticking the box option of the mediation in the multi-tier arbitration agreement or dispute resolution settlement that you have in the agreement, but the parties were really committed in participating in the mediation process and trying to settle their dispute through mediation. This is the first point. The second point that I wanted to shed the light on in relation to ADR is mainly related to the ICC Commission work on arbitration and ADR, and which is a unique think tank, and it's a rule-making body for the ICC dispute resolution services, within which a task force on ADR and arbitration was put in place, and it's mainly aiming at studying and analyzing how different ICC ADR services, being mediation, expert appraisal, dispute boards, docket decks, are currently being used by ICC users. And the purpose is to find solution for the post-COVID-19 world, and including technology options when assessing the most appropriate procedure to be taken once a dispute arises, or assisting users in building ADR procedures into the internal system. And actually this task force is comprising over 100 ADR practitioners, and especially in-house counsel who are in there in order to share and clarify the needs of the companies in relation to the ADR system. So this is, in my opinion, a huge achievement within the ICC through the ICC Commission in order to find better solutions and actually give more place to mediation, which appeared in our view one of the most efficient ADR process during the COVID year of 2020. I'm not sure to what extent this will proceed, but at least this was something that triggered the creation of this task force and trying to put in place more mediation. And of course, any practitioner today, I think, would not disagree with me in saying that mediation today is a core element in ADR, and we cannot just disregard it, even if we are in our respective institutions mainly focusing on arbitration, but one should not forget the role that mediation is playing today and how companies are looking at that very, very thoroughly and seeing in it, of course, a huge potential for the future. And just to clarify that the ADR Center is directed by my colleague Alia Lajimi, and please feel free to get in touch with her in case you have any comments. Unfortunately, she's not with us today, but yeah, please feel free to contact her if needed. Thank you, Sarah. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Mark. And I think for our participants today, it's important to highlight exactly the quality and high level of quality work that the Commission of the ICC has been undergoing. And I can only attest to the great work that's being done on the task force. I'm a member of the task force, and I'm leading a track on this task force, and I can only attest and definitely echo what you said, is for our participants to stay on the lookout for the report, which will provide a practical and much needed insights as to the impact and use of alternative dispute resolution, whether during or parallel to the arbitral process, and how the ICC also could offer a more efficient resolution to disputes to its users. We are a little bit over time, and as we can see, we haven't really noticed the time passing due to the diversity and richness of the discussion. We will be now popping up the last two questions of the poll and invite the participants to take part in them before sort of we conclude. So what is the most pronounced benefit ADR is playing during the pandemic? Right, it's quite interesting to see. Costs, again, is popping out. So definitely one of the main considerations is cost.
If I may, I think this is one of the questions where multiple choices could be also helpful. The first two were the main points, but thank you.
Yeah. Indeed, yeah. And so the last question is, what pandemic adjustments have been made to accommodate parties in disputes? And obviously we have participants from different jurisdictions, so please feel free as well to answer the question depending on the relevance and applicability and suitability of your answer. All right, so technology is here to stay, I guess, even after the pandemic. So definitely technology, I guess, is one of the sort of everlasting effects and takeaways from the pandemic. We will be wrapping up now, and I have probably sort of, that was sort of the debate or sort of the underlying question of our session today. And I would like to lay out this final questions to everyone. And maybe if I could start off with Robert to probably provide us his answer, which is, Robert, is the future bright for institutional arbitration in the MENA region?
I think the answer to that is without a doubt. I think if we look across all of the institutions that are represented here today and look at the statistics that we've heard, the initiatives that they have implemented and are implementing, we can all, I think, confirm and acknowledge that everyone's doing a fantastic job. There is a desire for disputes to be resolved by international commercial arbitration in this region. It is taking place, it is being done to a very high standard, and I think parties are coming back for more and more, and we will continue to see an increase in this region. And I think the important thing for all of us is to ensure that we continue to provide service to users, to parties, counsel, arbitrators, to an international standard in this region. And so long as we continue to do that, I think the future is very bright.
Thanks, Robert. And Pavel, is the future bright for institutional arbitration in the MENA region, looking at it from a DX perspective?
I also would agree with Robert that the future is bright. And I think that with our efforts, we are cracking the, let's say, people from the region traditions to go to the courts and instead choosing alternative dispute resolution methods.
So there's definitely, I guess, a shift sort of in the paradigms here. And Dr. Dalia, how does the Cairo Center see the future of institutional arbitration, particularly from a North African perspective? Is it a bright one?
I think it is a very bright one because, I mean, arbitration proved to be the most flexible means of dispute settlement during the pandemic. It was the fastest to adapt to all the new circumstances. So I think, yes, the future is bright, especially too in North Africa, where we find new cases. And, you know, in the North African part, there are new arbitration institutions coming along. So I think, yes, I hope the future is very bright.
And so over to you, Chris. Is the future bright from Riyadh?
Other than echoing what has been just said, I can only add that there's a huge appetite also from the younger generation. As you may know, we are on our second run with our mood, the Arabic mood, and since we started, we had around 280 participants from 24 universities. We're now 300 from 36 universities across GCC. So the youth is definitely eating it up. So I would say, yes, there is appetite.
And then last but not least, Mark, is the, obviously, I mean, with the recent developments in terms of presence in the region, but nevertheless, what are your views and position? Is the future bright for institutional arbitration for the ICC in the MENA region?
I fully concur with all of you, and I could not agree more. Of course, the future is very bright, and I think that the past years have demonstrated through statistics or either the development of all arbitration institution in the region that it's a very bright future, and tremendously bright. I would use the adjective used by Robert at the beginning of our webinar. It's and actually I think it will continue to be the case. There is no reason not to. Not only for arbitration, but generally for ADR and for technology dispute resolution systems in general. Yeah.
Thank you, Mark. And I think we have one unanswered question in the chat box before we wrap up, and I'm mindful of the time, which comes from Mohammed Fiki, which, and I leave whoever would like to answer it, is with respect to the first appointment. So to which extent the egg or chicken dilemma, or putting the egg before the chicken dilemma with respect to first appointments can be solved. Are there any tips that any of you would like probably to share with Mohammed and the other participants?
Look, I think from my perspective, there's lots of things you can do, and this is a fantastic forum for it. Get involved in the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators. Make sure that you go through the various different levels, and if you can get fellowship, I think that it gives you a solid understanding of what the arbitration process is, and ultimately a qualification that is internationally recognized. From a practical perspective, how do you take that forward? Well, a very good way of doing that is by trying to get some tribunal secretary appointments, whether that be by speaking to arbitrators in your market and getting them to work, getting an opportunity to work with them, or through institutions that offer tribunal secretary appointments through those institutions. And that gives you an opportunity to see the process and go through the process, and also learn from some of the best and brightest arbitrators that there are. And then I think, you have to, of course, make yourself known to the institutions. And that may be for the likes of DIAC and for SCCA, filling in a form and making an application to join a list or a roster, and demonstrating that you have the qualifications and the experience. And for other institutions like DIFCLSA and the ICC, simply providing us with a copy of your CV and your international arbitration experience, and just letting us know that you're available for us to at least consider you when we put names forward to our respective courts for consideration, when we have the gift of appointing arbitrators. And like Mark said, with regard to DIFCLSA arbitration, there are plenty of cases where it is actually appropriate to consider a less qualified, less experienced arbitrator, and perhaps sometimes even a first-time appointee with the appropriate supervision and support of the institution. There are lots of low-value cases out there that find their way into leading arbitral institutions that unfortunately are just not cost-effective to run, unless you get more junior people involved and give them an opportunity to have a go. And I think we institutions are all very keen to do that. And looking at statistics, almost 40% of all arbitrators appointed in DIFCLSA arbitrations last year were first-time appointees from the LSA court's perspective. We actively went out and looked for first-time appointees. They may have been experienced arbitrators under other systems and in other regions, but they hadn't done a DIFCLSA or an LSA arbitration before, and they were a first-time appointee. But for some of them, they never had an appointment at all. And it was because we had cases that were appropriate for those types of people. So there's lots of things you can do.
Thanks very much, Robert. I'm not sure if does anyone else would like to add in. Perfect. I'm mindful of the time and probably at the risk of stating that, you know, webinars probably tend to run a little bit over the hour in this region. I think we've kept ourselves up to the promise and fulfilled the task. On this note, I would like to thank again, Chris, Dr. Dalia, Mark, Pavel, and Robert for joining and providing very much needed and insightful comments and a sort of a interior view as to what really happens in the background, which is a lot of work. And congratulations to all of you again on you know, paving through and still sailing through difficult circumstances. A big thank you to the participants today, and last but not least at all, thank you very much to the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators for putting this together. Thank you very much to Safwan at the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators for providing us with the support and needed. And a big and huge thank you and congratulations to Brian Brannan, who joined us from Vermont. Thank you very much, Brian. It wouldn't have been possible without you. So on this note, I conclude the Middle East series of the 2021 World Tour, and thank you all for your participation. Stay safe and take care, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.